Спасибо, уважаемый Вячеслав Викторович, уважаемые участники заседания. Россия, как вы знаете, 1 января нынешнего года вступила в права председателя.
Dear participants of the meeting, Russia, as you know, on January 1st of this year, assumed the chairmanship of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Our watch is held under the motto, Collective Security in a Multipolar World, a Unified Goal, a Common Responsibility. Together with our allies within the CSTO, we are increasing our efforts to uphold common approaches to solving international security problems, which have been much discussed today. The founding documents of the CSTO, I want to particularly emphasize, enshrine the principles of peaceful coexistence of states, the priority of political and diplomatic methods of regulation, compliance with the norms of international law with the central role of the UN. And I consider it fundamentally important that in the current period when the West increasingly, ever more broadly, resorts to illegitimate use of force, relentless methods of dictation and outright plunder, the CSTO countries do not change or revise the goals of their activities that I have quoted. We will not deviate from universal norms of international law. On the contrary, we will counteract attempts to undermine them and counteract attempts to impose lawlessness in world affairs. By upholding universal norms of international law, above all the sovereign equality of states, as enshrined in the UN Charter, I am convinced that we preserve the moral leadership on the international stage that has always been in demand. And after the conclusion, I hope relatively soon, of what we are currently witnessing, moral leadership will be in demand as never before. And it is on such a basis that we propose to our partners, including the principle of sovereign equality of states, which the West, since the founding of the UN when this principle was written into the Charter, has never once, in any diplomatic, military or crisis situation, respected. On this basis, we will jointly and actively participate in the process of shaping the contours of the future architecture of equal and indivisible security in the Eurasian space. And we see the CSTO as a structure that could become one of the load-bearing pillars of such a security architecture. The CSTO has formed as an authoritative association of allied states. The activities of this association are not directed against anyone. Contain no aggressive aspirations at their core, and are built exclusively in the interests of maintaining regional stability and the well-being of the countries in our organization. The constructive disposition of our organization is evidenced by the experience we have actively introduced since the creation of the OSCE into dialogue with our Western colleagues. It was the CSTO that spoke in favor of dialogue with the North Atlantic Alliance. It was the CSTO that proposed that within the framework of the OSCE, under this universal Euro-Atlantic umbrella, a working process of building trust, transparency and so on be established. And it was the CSTO that welcomed in its time the decision of the UN Secretary-General to regularly hold meetings of the Secretaries-General of military political organizations. NATO members participated there, as did the CSTO, but even during that period, NATO's attitude toward the CSTO was utterly arrogant. There was never any talk of equality from the leaders of the North Atlantic Alliance, or indeed from all its members. Therefore, when we reaffirm our openness to international contacts, we must of course bear in mind the lessons of the very recent past. In the CSTO, all decisions, as you know, are made by consensus. This is not merely a figure of speech, it is genuinely work aimed at working out a balance of interests, on principles of mutual respect, good neighborliness, genuine friendship, and mutual assistance. There is no stick discipline, as we observe in NATO, present in the CSTO. I think all of you can confirm this. And now this stick discipline, by the way, has migrated into the European Union as well, where unelected Brussels bureaucracy tries to demand from governments elected by the peoples of European countries actions that do not fit within the agreed norms of operation of this European Union. Russia adheres to continuity in the development of the main directions of our cooperation within the CSTO. We continue work on implementing the initiatives of the previous chair, the Republic of Crimea. And of course, as many colleagues have already said today, as Vyacheslav Viktorovich spoke about in detail, our goal is to preserve and protect the truth about the common struggle for the liberation of the world from Nazism, to perpetuate the feat of the Soviet people who defended the independence of their native land and liberated Europe and the world from the Brown Plague. On April 19th, Russia proclaimed the Day of Remembrance of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people, perpetrated by the Nazis and their accomplices during the Great Patriotic War of 1941-1945. And of course, everything necessary must be done so that young people understand their history, the history of their ancestors, and are raised in a spirit of the deepest respect, both for those who fought at the front and for those who ensured victory in the rear. Our countries have made an enormous contribution to the resolution of these common tasks. In the current year, the international community marks the 80th anniversary of the conclusion of the work of the Nuremberg International Military Tribunal, which convicted a significant portion of the main Nazi war criminals and legally enshrined the defeat of fascism. The significance of the Nuremberg Tribunal is difficult to overestimate. The historic verdict not only convicted the criminals of the Third Reich, but also outlawed and placed beyond morality the very ideology of Nazism. To our great regret, this ideology, as indeed the practice of Nazism, is now being revived, including, as lamentable as it is in Germany, as well as in those countries that eagerly joined Hitler's hordes in the attack on the Soviet Union, and which are now again trying to unite under those cursed banners to inflict a strategic defeat, as you know, on our country. These are, of course, the Baltic states. We see it in Finland. But I need not even mention Ukraine, which has been shaped over not just one decade into an instrument for waging war against our state.
Этим активно занимаются и наши коллеги в Министерстве обороны, в других силовых структурах.
I must also mention, in connection with attempts to revive Nazism, Britain, which has in general always been the birthplace of the philosophy of racial supremacy, we must, without question, preserve the memory of the victims of the genocide of the Soviet people, the genocide of each people of the Soviet Union, and preserving that memory, we are of course obliged to do everything so that these dates, and each of our countries has many such dates, do not become a mere formality. Therefore, we are convinced that upholding our common position on the punishment of those and the prohibition of the memory of those who carried out the genocide of the peoples of the Soviet Union, all the peoples of the Soviet Union, this must not be a one-off gesture, it must be constant work. And parliamentarians are actively engaged in this, as are our colleagues in the Ministry of Defense, in other security structures, and our diplomatic service is actively engaged in this as well. I would like, through you, to convey my deepest bow to all my colleagues. We recently met with many of them at the Council of Foreign Ministers of the Commonwealth of Independent States, and also spoke of the fact that our embassies, our consular institutions must continue and improve coordination of actions in foreign countries, primarily in European countries and other countries that participated one way or another in the Second World War. And this work must necessarily be carried out on the basis of facts. There are more and more facts now. Our historians, our public figures are carrying out enormous research work and thereby creating an additional foundation so that our efforts, our diplomatic efforts, may be crowned with success. We are working toward justice prevailing. Therefore, we continue the line of developing contacts, as I have already said, of our organization, primarily with states of the Eurasian space. Security here on this geopolitical territory is important to us, as is security with integration associations. Although those who follow recent developments closely know that threats in Eurasia are growing substantially. This requires additional efforts from us, because those who today try to dominate the world through the unleashing of wars, the killing of civilians to intimidate entire peoples, they are of course creating ever new threats, including for our countries on our, I emphasize once more, common space. The instability around Afghanistan has already been mentioned today. There, a difficult struggle is underway against manifestations of terrorism and drug trafficking. All of this, of course, requires additional attention from us. But the crisis in the Persian Gulf, resulting from the unprovoked aggression of the United States and Israel against the Islamic Republic of Iran, in parallel with the expanding war in Lebanon, the expanding military operations against the Syrian Arab Republic, with an eye toward another attempt to split that state. And of course the complete stagnation that is deepening the tragedy of the Palestinian people in Gaza and on the west bank of the Jordan River. The chances, if one looks at a geographical map of creating a Palestinian state, are becoming fewer and fewer. And from Israel come statements, official statements, that there will never be such a state. There will be the State of Israel, moreover, within expanded borders. This will not pass by our region, because the reverberations. I've just returned from the International Diplomatic Conference in Antalya, and from the speeches of President Erdogan, from the speeches of other participants, from the questions that were raised during my participation in this event.
Уже звучат голоса все громче и громче из самых разных источников официальных в Европе о том, что нужно сколачивать новый блок из Европы.
There was a very serious concern expressed not only about the consequences of the crisis around the Persian Gulf for the countries of the Arabian Peninsula, but also for the Caspian, the South Caucasus, and Central Asia. This region is constantly interconnected, and instability spills over from one part to another. There is no doubt that those who are doing everything to sustain this chaos have as one of their not least important goals the deepening of the split within the Islamic world. This is absolutely obvious, and our organization, as consisting to a significant degree of our Muslim colleagues, must bear this in mind in its practical projects and programs. And on the western flank, we see the stubborn build-up of a course toward assembling new armies for yet another attempt to inflict a strategic defeat on the Russian Federation. Mention is also made, by the way, of the Republic of Belarus. President Lukashenko spoke about this quite recently in one of his interviews, and they are not troubled by the fact that within NATO we observe a crisis. Voices are already being heard louder and louder from the most varied official sources in Europe that a new bloc needs to be cobbled together from the EU, Britain, Norway, and, that's right, Ukraine. President Zelensky has already declared that he is ready to head this new war machine and prepare Europe for yet another war against the Russian Federation, against our country, as was the case in the First World War, as was the case under Napoleon, as was the case under Hitler.
Есть достаточно серьезная программа в области укрепления стабильности и безопасности.
Forces are uniting, and if one takes into account that Zelensky's actions are characterized by the leadership of the EU as upholding European values, this means only one thing, that once again they want to unite European armies under the banners of Nazism. Because Nazism is precisely what Zelensky and his regime are actively engaged in, both in ideology and in practice. Here too are the bans on the Russian language in all spheres. Here too is the encouragement of the practice of Nazi gatherings. Here too is, of course, the ban on the canonical Orthodox Church. And it seems to me that we must pay attention to such things, including in our military planning, because the crises that we observe around the perimeter of the CSTO's zone of responsibility must not become a source of actual combat operations causing us harm, and we must pursue preventive goals, doing everything necessary to strengthen the military component of the CSTO. This, it seems to me, is our sacred duty, and to work with our nearest neighbors, partners of the CIS, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. Well, and as in the CIS, but especially in the SCO, there is a fairly serious program in the area of strengthening stability and security. The three Secretaries General of the CSTO, CIS, and SCO recently approved a roadmap. and it provides, among other things, for joint conferences in Moscow on security issues in Central Asia and Afghanistan. And I think life will suggest what additional aspects of the security dimension, including geographical ones, would be relevant. Kyrgyzstan holds the chairmanship of the SCO, a very good opportunity for continuity of contacts and development of cooperation between the CSTO and the SCO. And of course, we are interested in expanding the horizons of interaction with friendly countries, including those with observer and partner status, among which, through the parliamentary line, is Serbia. And it seems to me very important that these ties be maintained and strengthened, because Serbia too is on the front line, on the line of the struggle for national independence, and faces direct demands from Brussels bureaucrats to take an anti-Russian line, or even to send its troops into that very bloc they are threatening to form against our country. We advocate the development of a network of auxiliary and consultative mechanisms of the CSTO in key areas of interaction. One of the ideas I would like to share is the establishment of an association of think tanks of the CSTO member states on issues of international relations and security. It seems to me that in current conditions, such a new format would harmoniously fit into our work to strengthen all spheres of allied interaction. We attach great importance to the development, as I have already said, of the power component of the organization. The emphasis in the program of our chairmanship presented by President Putin is on building up the combat potential of the CSTO collective forces, equipping them with modern and compatible weapons and equipment. Such work is carried out in accordance with the nature of current and prospective challenges, taking into account the experience of modern armed conflicts. This is also one of our priorities, including the integration of the latest achievements of science and medical technologies in the interests of ensuring biosecurity in the CSTO space. In the Coordinating Council on Biological Security, which we have established, we, as chairman, will continue work on an important joint document, analyzing and forecasting the biological situation in the organization's zone of responsibility. In this document, I hope, practical recommendations will also be formulated. We intend to expand the toolkit for joint counteraction to international terrorism, extremism, combating the financing of terrorism, the legalization of criminal proceeds, drug trafficking, transnational organized crime, and illegal migration. We have begun work on a CSTO anti-terrorism strategy through 2030. We expect that this year the heads of state will be able to approve it. We highly value the role of interparliamentary cooperation. Today, a memorable date was noted, one that will arrive this year, the 20th anniversary of the formation of the CSTO Parliamentary Assembly. The assemblies carry out very important systematic work to promote the creation of a unified legal space across the entire CSTO territory and to provide legislative support for decisions taken by the Collective Security Council. The expected signing of the agreement of the Parliamentary Assembly will, of course, open new opportunities in developing this dimension of the CSTO and expanding the external ties of our organization. It will contribute to strengthening its authority. Experts from the foreign ministries are also actively participating in the finalization of this draft. On November 11th of this year comes the key CSTO event, the summit in Moscow. We, together with our colleagues from the diplomatic services of all the countries present here, will do everything so that by this summit, substantive, worthy documents are prepared that will contribute to the further development of our alliance. Thank you for your attention.
Насыщенные, достойные документы, которые будут способствовать дальнейшему развитию нашего союзничества. Спасибо за внимание.